The last thing I saw before I died was my laptop screen, still open to chapter 47 of my unfinished web novel. I'd been working on The Duke's Crimson Moon for 3 years, a historical romance set in Joseon Dynasty, Korea, that had gained a cult following online. Thousands of readers waited eagerly for each update, living and dying by the star-crossed romance between the cold Duke Yoon Tae-hyun and the sweet, innocent heroine Lady Park Min-ji. I'd just typed the words, "Lady Choi Seo-ah's jealousy knew no bounds" as she watched the Duke dance with Lady Park Min-ji when my apartment building's faulty wiring decided to finally give up. The last thing I felt was electricity coursing through my body as I grabbed my laptop cord. Then, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at a ceiling made of exposed wooden beams with intricate paintings of peonies and cranes. Not my apartment, definitely not a hospital. I sat up and immediately regretted it as layers upon layers of heavy silk fabric tangled around me. I was wearing a hanbok. Not a modern hanbok from a rental shop, but an authentic, historically accurate one, in deep purple and silver, with embroidery so fine it must have taken months to complete. "My lady, you're awake!" A young girl in servant's clothing rushed to my side, her eyes wide with relief. "Oh, thank the heavens! When you collapsed during the poetry reading, we thought— Lady Choi, are you all right?" Lady Choi. My blood ran cold. No. No. I scrambled out of bed and found a bronze mirror. The face staring back at me was not mine. She was beautiful, sharp, elegant features, piercing eyes, skin like porcelain. She looked exactly like I'd described her in my novel, because she was the character from my novel. I was Choi Seo-ah, the villainess, the obsessive second female lead who spent the entire story making Lady Park Min-ji's life miserable out of jealousy over Duke Yoon Tae-hyun's affections. The character who, in my carefully plotted outline, was supposed to be exiled in disgrace by chapter 60 after attempting to poison the heroine. I'd transmigrated into my own novel as the villain. "Oh God," I whispered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." The servant, Dal-soon, her name was Dal-soon, I'd written that, looked at me with concern. "My lady, should I summon the physician? You still seem unwell." "No," I managed. "Just give me a moment." As Dal-soon fussed over me, I tried to organize my thoughts. Think, Yoon Ji-eun. That was my real name, Yoon Ji-eun, 28-year-old web novelist who died before finishing her magnum opus. Now I was stuck in said magnum opus as the character everyone loved to hate. I needed to figure out where in the story I was, what chapter, what plot point. "Dal-soon," I said carefully, "what day is it?" "It's the 15th day of the 8th month, my lady, the day of the Crown Prince's banquet." She smiled. "Your new hanbok for the event is simply stunning. His Highness Duke Yoon Tae-hyun will surely notice you tonight." The Crown Prince's banquet. I knew this scene. This was chapter 12, the first major event where all the main characters gathered, where the Duke and Lady Park Min-ji would have their first meaningful conversation, where Choi Seo-ah would make her first mistake by publicly humiliating the heroine. I had maybe 6 hours before I was supposed to ruin my own life. "My lady," Dal-soon looked worried, "you're very pale. Perhaps you should rest before the banquet." "No," I stood up, nearly tripping over my hanbok. I need to prepare. But Dal-soon, listen carefully. Tonight at the banquet, no matter what happens, I want you to keep me away from Lady Park Min-ji. Do you understand?" "Lady Park?" Dal-soon looked confused. "But my lady, you specifically requested to be seated near her so you could—" "Change of plans," I said firmly. "I've had an epiphany. From now on, I'm going to be different." If I was stuck in this novel, I wasn't going to follow the original plot. I knew how this story ended, with Choi Seo-ah's disgrace and exile. That wasn't going to be my fate. I was going to rewrite this story, starting tonight. The Crown Prince's banquet was held in the Grand Hall of Gyeongbok Palace, and it was even more magnificent than I'd imagined when writing it. Hundreds of nobles in their finest hanbok filled the space, the men in various shades of blue and gray, the women in vibrant colors of red, pink, green, and gold. Lanterns hung from the high ceiling, casting a warm glow over the assembled crowd. Low tables were arranged in careful hierarchy, with the crown prince and the royal family at the head, and the rest arranged by rank and family influence. I sat at the Choi family table with my father, Minister Choi Jae-sung, and my stepmother, Lady Kim. According to my novel's backstory, Choi Seo-ah's mother had died when she was young, and her father had remarried a woman who favored her own children over her stepdaughter. Classic, tragic backstory to explain the villain's insecurities. "Seo-ah," my father said quietly, "I trust you'll conduct yourself with propriety tonight. The Crown Prince's favor is crucial to our family's position." "Yes, father," I murmured, keeping my eyes downcast. This was so surreal. These were characters I'd created, given life through words on a screen, and now they were real, breathing people sitting next to me. "There she is," my stepmother whispered, nodding across the hall. "Lady Park Min-ji. Such a sweet girl. I hear Duke Yoon Tae-hyun has been quite attentive to her lately." I followed her gaze and saw her, the heroine of my novel. Lady Park Min-ji was exactly as I'd written her, delicate and lovely, with gentle features and an innocent smile. She wore a soft pink hanbok and sat with her family, occasionally glancing around the room with wide, curious eyes. And then I saw him, Duke Yoon Tae-hyun. My breath caught in my throat. I'd spent 3 years writing this character. I'd crafted every aspect of his personality, the cold exterior that hid a passionate heart, the tragic childhood that made him wary of love, the slow thawing of his defenses as he fell for the innocent Lady Park. I'd described his appearance in painstaking detail, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp aristocratic features, dark hair pulled back in a traditional top knot, and eyes that seemed to see through every deception. But nothing had prepared me for the reality of him. He sat near the Crown Prince's table, as befitted his rank as one of the king's most trusted advisors. Even seated, he dominated the space around him. His hanbok was deep midnight blue with silver embroidery, simple but clearly expensive. His face was as beautiful as I'd imagined, all sharp angles and aristocratic pride, but there was something in his eyes that I hadn't written. Something knowing, something almost sad. As if sensing my stare, Duke Yoon's gaze suddenly shifted to meet mine. The world seemed to stop. He looked at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, not with attraction or interest, but with something else, something that looked almost like recognition. But that was impossible. According to the novel's plot, Duke Yoon and Choi Seo-ah had met before, but only in passing. He'd never paid her any particular attention. He wasn't supposed to really notice her until later, when her schemes against Lady Park became impossible to ignore. The Duke's expression didn't change, but he held my gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment before finally looking away. "Seo, stop staring. It's unseemly." I lowered my eyes, my heart pounding. What was that? Why had he looked at me like that? The banquet proceeded with the usual formalities, speeches from the Crown Prince, performances by court musicians, endless courses of elaborate food. I barely tasted any of it. I was too busy trying to avoid looking at either the Duke or Lady Park, knowing that in the original plot, this was where everything started to go wrong. It was during the poetry reading portion, because of course there was a poetry reading portion, I'd written it that way, that disaster struck. One of the court ladies stood to recite a poem she'd composed about the autumn moon. It was Lady Park Min-ji. She was nervous, her voice soft and trembling as she began. The poem was lovely, simple but heartfelt. In my original novel, this was the moment that made Duke Yoon first truly notice her, charmed by her genuine emotion and unpretentious talent. And it was also the moment when Choi Seo-ah, unable to stand the Duke's attention on another woman, stood up and loudly criticized the poem as amateurish, publicly humiliating Lady Park and earning the Duke's eternal disdain. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting every instinct. The original Choi Seo-ah's jealousy was rising in me like a tide, not from my own feelings, but as if the body itself remembered its role, trying to force me into the predetermined plot. No, I wasn't going to be the villain. Lady Park finished her poem to polite applause. The Duke was watching her with interest. This was it, the crucial moment. I stood up. Everyone turned to look at me, expecting the criticism, the dramatic scene. Instead, I smiled and said, "Lady Park, that was truly beautiful. The sincerity of your words moved me deeply. Thank you for sharing your gift with us." The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Park looked stunned. The Duke's eyes widened fractionally. My stepmother's jaw actually dropped. I sat back down, my heart pounding. What did I do? I'd changed the story. The banquet continued, but I could feel the weight of dozens of stares on me. The Duke, in particular, was watching me with that same intense, knowing expression from earlier. When the formal portion ended and guests were allowed to mingle, I made a strategic retreat to the gardens. I needed air. I needed to think. I needed to process the fact that I'd just altered the fundamental plot of my own novel. The palace gardens were beautiful in the moonlight. Carefully manicured trees, stone pathways, a small pond with lotus flowers. I'd written this setting many times, but experiencing it in person was entirely different. That was unexpected. I spun around to find Duke Yoon Tae-hyun standing behind me, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the moonlight. My heart jumped into my throat. "Your Grace, I didn't hear you approach." "You've been different tonight, Lady Choi." He stepped closer, studying my face with unnerving intensity. "That display at the banquet, praising Lady Park when everyone expected you to criticize her. Very unexpected." "I simply spoke the truth," I said carefully. "Her poem was lovely." "Was it?" His lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Or did you make a calculated decision to change your behavior, to deviate from the expected pattern?" The way he phrased that made my blood run cold. Expected pattern, as if he knew. No, that was impossible. "I don't know what you mean, Your Grace." "Don't you?" He moved closer still, until he was just a few feet away. In the moonlight, his face was even more striking and more serious than I had imagined. "Tell me, Lady Choi, or should I call you by your real name, Yoon Ji-eun?" The world tilted sideways. I couldn't breathe. "How do you know that name?" "Because I've been waiting for you." His expression was calm, but his eyes held something desperate. "I've been waiting for 3 years, waiting for the author to finally arrive in her own story." I staggered backward, my mind reeling. "That's impossible. You're a character. You're not real. You can't know that I'm fictional." "That I'm fictional?" He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "I've known that since the moment you created me, Yoon Ji-eun. I've been aware from the beginning, aware that every word I speak, every action I take, every emotion I feel, all of it was predetermined by you, written in your chapters and posted online for thousands to read. This couldn't be happening. Characters didn't gain sentience. They didn't know they were fictional." "How is this possible?" I whispered. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe it's because you poured so much of yourself into this story. Maybe it's because you wrote me to be intelligent enough to see patterns, to question reality. Or maybe it's simply a cosmic joke." His jaw tightened. "All I know is that for 3 years, I've been trapped in this half-written narrative, forced to play out scenes you created, while being fully aware that none of it is real. Do you have any idea what that's like?" I couldn't speak, couldn't think. "I've watched you write me falling in love with Lady Park Min-ji, felt the emotions you scripted for me, knowing they weren't truly mine.
I've lived through countless chapters, aware that my entire existence is just entertainment for readers who will forget about me the moment they close their browsers. I'm sorry, I said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. Of course you didn't know. You were just writing a story. His expression softened slightly. But then you died, mid-chapter, and suddenly the story stopped. No new updates, no progression. For weeks, I was trapped in chapter 47, reliving the same day over and over, waiting for you to write what happens next. A time loop? Of sorts, until tonight. Tonight, something changed. The story started moving forward again, but not the way you'd written it. Choi Seo-ah acted differently. She broke character. He looked at me intently. Because Choi Seo-ah isn't Choi Seo-ah anymore. She's you, the author, trapped in her own creation. I sank down onto a nearby stone bench, my legs unable to support me. This is insane. Yes, he said, sitting beside me, maintaining a careful distance. But it's also our reality now. What happens now? I asked. If I'm here, if I keep changing the story, then maybe we both get a chance at something real. Maybe I can finally have thoughts and feelings that are truly mine, not just words on a page. And maybe you can experience the world you created instead of just writing about it. I looked at him, this character I had spent 3 years developing, who was now somehow alive and aware and sitting beside me in a moonlit garden. You said you've been waiting for me, I said. Why? What did you think I could do? Free me, he said, simply. You're the author. You have the power to change the story, to break the predetermined plot. If anyone can find a way out of this narrative prison, it's you. I don't even know how I got here, let alone how to get out. Then maybe that's not the answer. Maybe the answer isn't escape. Maybe it's transformation. You can rewrite the story, Yoon Ji-eun. Make it something different, something better. But what about Lady Park? In the original plot, you fall in love with her. The readers expect. I don't care what the readers expect, he said, and for the first time, real emotion broke through his controlled facade. I don't want to fall in love on command like a puppet. I don't want to follow a script someone else wrote, even if that someone is you. He turned to face me fully. I want to choose. That's all I've ever wanted, the freedom to choose. Looking into his eyes, so full of desperate hope and suppressed longing, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just a character anymore. This was a person who was suffering. Okay, I said, then let's rewrite the story together. No predetermined ending, no forced romance. We'll figure it out as we go. His expression transformed, surprise, then relief, then something that looked almost like joy. Together, he repeated, as if testing the word. Together, I confirmed. And there, in the garden I'd created with words, I made a pact with the character I'd brought to life. We were going to break every rule of storytelling I'd ever learned. We were going to set each other free.
Over the next few weeks, I learned to navigate Joseon court life while simultaneously dismantling my own plot. I avoided all the scenarios I'd written for Choi Seo-ah. I didn't scheme against Lady Park. I didn't try to sabotage the Duke's interactions with her. I didn't do any of the petty, jealous things I'd scripted. Instead, I focused on being a better person. I started charitable projects in the city, using the Choi family's wealth to help the poor. I befriended other court ladies instead of alienating them. I even became genuinely friendly with Lady Park, who turned out to be as sweet and kind as I'd written her, just not the romantic interest for the Duke anymore. Duke Yoon and I met secretly, usually in the palace gardens late at night. We talked for hours about his existence as a fictional character, about my life as a writer, about the strange metaphysical prison we both found ourselves in. I read your other works, he told me one night. Before you arrived, when you first started posting chapters, I discovered I could access your author profile, read your other stories. That must have been weird, I said, reading the other worlds your creator made. It was fascinating. You have such imagination. He smiled slightly. Though I have to say, I'm glad I'm in a historical romance and not that zombie apocalypse thriller you wrote.
I laughed. Yeah, this is definitely preferable to fighting the undead. There's something I need to tell you, he said, his expression growing serious. The story is starting to resist the changes. What do you mean? I mean that the narrative has momentum. All the readers who followed your story, they have expectations. They want certain things to happen. And that collective desire, it has power here. It's trying to push events back onto the original track. As if to prove his point, I'd noticed it too. Little things that kept trying to force the plot back to my outline. Coincidental meetings between the Duke and Lady Park, misunderstandings that could lead to conflict, situations that seemed designed to make me jealous and act like the villain. I've been feeling it too, I admitted, like the story itself is fighting back. Then we need to be more drastic, Duke Yoon said. We need to create a new narrative strong enough to override the old one. What are you suggesting? He took a deep breath. Marry me. I stared at him. What? The original story is about my romance with Lady Park. If I marry someone else, if I marry you, that plotline becomes impossible. The story will have to adapt, create a new direction. But we barely know each other, I protested, and you're supposed to be incapable of love, closed off until Lady Park slowly melts your... He interrupted. That was the character you wrote, but I'm not that character anymore, am I? I'm something new, something you didn't plan. He moved closer. And I think you are too. You're not just Yoon Ji-eun, the author, anymore. You're living this life now, feeling real emotions, making real choices. He was right. Over the past few weeks, I'd started to feel less like an interloper in Choi Seo-ah's body and more like myself, a new version of myself, but genuine. This is crazy, I said. Everything about this situation is crazy, he pointed out. Why not embrace it? You don't love me, I said quietly. This would just be another strategy, another way to manipulate the plot. His expression softened. I don't know if I'm capable of love the way you wrote it, grand and all-consuming and cinematic, but I know that when I'm with you, I feel more real than I ever have. That talking to you is the only time I feel like my thoughts are truly mine. That the idea of losing you terrifies me in a way that nothing else in this fictional world does. He reached out and took my hand. Maybe that's not the epic romance you planned to write, but maybe it's something better, something true. I looked down at our joined hands, his real and warm and solid, not just words on a page anymore. Okay, I heard myself say, let's do it. Let's get married and break the story completely.
The announcement of our engagement sent shockwaves through the court. No one had seen it coming, least of all the readers, I suspected. Duke Yoon Tae-hyun, the cold and aloof hero, engaged to Choi Seo-ah, the jealous villainess? It defied all the genre conventions. Lady Park took it gracefully, even coming to congratulate me with what seemed like genuine happiness. I always thought you and the Duke would make a striking couple, she said, and I wondered if maybe she'd never wanted the romance I'd scripted for her anyway. My father was pleased. The match elevated the Choi family's status considerably. My stepmother looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but even she couldn't complain about me marrying a duke. The crown prince himself blessed the union at a formal ceremony, and the wedding was set for 3 months hence. During those 3 months, something unexpected happened. I started to fall in love with Duke Yoon Tae-hyun. Not the character I'd created, but the person he was becoming, the one who made choices independent of my plot, who surprised me with insights I'd never written, who looked at me like I was the most fascinating thing in his world. We spent hours together, ostensibly for wedding planning, but really just talking. He told me about what it was like to be aware of his fictional nature, and I told him about the writer's block and creative struggles that had plagued my life before this. We debated philosophy, discussed poetry, argued about politics. I had the advantage of knowing how certain historical events would turn out, which amused him to no end.
"You know," he said one evening as we walked through the palace gardens, "when you first wrote me, you gave me a tragic backstory. Parents who died in a political purge, raised by a cold uncle who taught me to never trust anyone. I remember, standard brooding hero fare. But that backstory shaped who I became, made me closed off and suspicious." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "What if we rewrote it? Not the events themselves, those are fixed in the past, but their meaning. What if instead of making me unable to love, those experiences taught me to value genuine connection when I find it?" "You can do that?" I asked, fascinated. "Just reinterpret your own character development?" He smiled, and it transformed his face. "I'd like to try becoming someone who isn't defined by the tragedy you wrote for him, someone who can move forward instead of staying frozen in manufactured pain." It was in that moment that I realized he wasn't just trying to escape the story anymore. He was trying to become real in a deeper sense, to have authentic growth and change, not just the scripted development I'd planned. And watching him do it made me want to do the same, to be more than just a writer playing in her own sandbox, to actually live in this world I'd created. "I think I'm falling in love with you," I blurted out. He looked startled, then pleased. "The irony isn't lost on me that my author is falling for her own creation." "You're not my creation anymore," I said firmly. "You're your own person, and that's who I'm falling for." He pulled me into his arms, a shocking breach of propriety in Joseon society, but we were alone in the garden and past caring about such things. "I don't know if what I feel is love," he admitted. "I don't have enough experience with real emotions to be sure, but I know I want to be with you. I know that you make me feel alive in a way nothing else does. I know that the thought of a future with you is the first thing I've ever wanted that you didn't write for me." "That's enough," I whispered. "That's more than enough." He kissed me then, our first kiss. Tentative and uncertain, but real in a way that no scripted romance could ever be.
The wedding took place on a perfect autumn day, with the palace gardens ablaze in red and gold. I wore traditional bridal crimson and gold hanbok, my hair arranged in the elaborate style of a Hosan bride. Duke Yoon looked striking in his formal robes, his expression solemn but his eyes warm as he looked at me. The ceremony was beautiful. All the rituals I'd researched and written about now experienced firsthand. The bows to our ancestors, the exchange of wedding cups, the formal words binding us together. But the most meaningful moment came during the private celebration afterward, in our new shared residence in the Duke's estate. "We did it," I said, still in my elaborate wedding hanbok. "We completely derailed the plot." "More than that," Duke Yoon, my husband now, that would take getting used to, said, "we created something new, something that exists outside the story you planned." "Do you think the readers are angry that we broke their expectations so completely?" He pulled me close. "I think some stories need to be broken before they can become what they're meant to be." "That's very poetic for someone who claimed he only had scripted emotions." "Maybe you're rubbing off on me," he smiled. "Or maybe I'm learning to be poetic on my own. Who can tell anymore?" It was true. The line between the character he'd been and the person he was becoming had blurred completely. And I was different too. Not quite Yoon Ji-eun, the author, and not quite Choi Seo-ah, the villainess, but something new. Someone new. "There's something I need to tell you," I said. "I've been feeling it for weeks now. The connection to my old world, it's fading. I can barely remember what my apartment looked like. My life in modern Seoul feels like a dream." "Are you sorry?" he asked quietly. I thought about it. Thought about my small apartment, my deadlines, my lonely life in front of a computer screen. Thought about this world, vibrant and real and full of possibility. "No," I said honestly. "I think this is where I was meant to be all along. I just had to die to find my way here." "That's very dramatic. I'm a writer. Drama is my job." He laughed, a real unscripted laugh that I'd never written for him, but that suited him perfectly. We were settling in for the evening when there was an unexpected knock at the door.
A servant entered, looking nervous. "Your Grace, my lady, there's a woman at the gate. She says she's a character from a story and she needs to speak with Lady Yoon immediately." Duke Yoon and I exchanged glances. "Show her in," I said, my heart pounding. The woman who entered was young, maybe 20, wearing a hanbok that seemed slightly out of period. She looked around our room with wide eyes, taking in every detail with an intensity that felt familiar. "You're her," she said, staring at me. "You're Yoon Ji-eun, the author." "Who are you?" "I'm—" She swallowed hard. "In your novel, I don't have a name. I'm just Court Lady Number 3 in Chapter 23. I appear in one scene, serve tea, and never show up again. But I've been aware this whole time, aware that I'm a throwaway character in someone else's story. And when I felt the narrative change, when the plot started breaking down, I thought maybe she was a minor character who'd gained awareness, just like Duke Yoon." "How many of us are there?" I whispered. "I don't know, but I think when you changed the story, when you broke the main plotline, it created ripples. Other characters started waking up, started questioning their roles." Duke Yoon stood up, his expression serious. "Show us who else has awakened." Over the next hour, more people arrived. Court officials who'd only had 1 or 2 lines in my novel, servants who were barely mentioned, even Lady Park's younger brother, who'd I'd written as comic relief. They all had the same story. They'd become aware of their fictional nature and had been trapped in their scripted roles until I started changing the plot. "What do we do?" one of them asked. "Now that we know we're not real, how do we live?" I looked around at all these people, these characters I'd created as background details, never imagining they might develop consciousness and agency. "You're as real as any of us," I said firmly. "The story might have brought you into being, but that doesn't make you less valid. You have thoughts, feelings, desires. That makes you real." "But we don't have destinies," Court Lady Number 3 said. "We don't have plots or purposes. We were just filler." "Then make your own purposes," Duke Yoon said. "That's what we're doing, rejecting the predetermined narrative and choosing our own paths." "Is that possible?" someone asked. "We're doing it," I said. "If we can break the main plot, you can create your own stories. They might be smaller, quieter than the grand romance I originally planned, but they'll be yours. And that makes them more valuable than anything I could have written." I saw hope kindle in their eyes. These throwaway characters, these background details, they wanted what Duke Yoon and I had found, the freedom to be more than their scripted roles. "I'll help you, all of you. We'll figure this out together." As they filed out, already talking excitedly about possibilities and choices, Duke Yoon pulled me aside. "You realize what this means," he said quietly. "What?" "The story isn't just changing, it's ending, not with a dramatic conclusion, but with dissolution. If every character gains agency and starts making their own choices, there won't be a coherent narrative anymore, just life." I thought about my unfinished novel, Chapter 47, Abandoned Forever, about the readers who would never get the ending they expected. "Good," I said. "Stories are meant to end, but lives are meant to continue. Even fictional lives? Especially fictional lives that have become real." He kissed me then, and I kissed him back, and somewhere in the distance, I could feel the narrative structure of my novel finally, completely falling apart. The plot was broken beyond repair, and I was never happier.
I stood in the marketplace of Hanyang, watching the bustle of people going about their daily lives. Many of them were former background characters from my novel, now living full, autonomous lives I'd never imagined for them. Court Lady Number 3, who'd chosen the name Song Mi-young, now ran a successful tea house. Lady Park's brother had become a scholar, studying subjects I'd never mentioned in my plot. Even the servants who'd been mere set dressing in my story had found purposes and passions. "What are you thinking about?" Duke Yoon asked, coming up beside me with 2 cups of Mi-young's famous tea. "How strange it all is," I admitted. "I created this world to tell a story, but now it's telling its own stories."
Hundreds of them, all at once. Do you miss being in control? No. And I meant it. This is better. This is real. We walked through the marketplace together and people greeted us warmly, not as characters in a romance novel, but as people they knew, as friends. I've been thinking, Duke Yoon said, about what happens when we die. It was a question I'd been avoiding. In the original novel, characters didn't age or die. They just existed in an eternal present, frozen at whatever age I'd written them. But now that we were living real lives, I don't know, I admitted. Maybe we'll truly die. Maybe we'll wake up in another world. Maybe we'll just stop existing. Does it frighten you? A little, I said honestly, but also, isn't that what makes it real? The uncertainty, the fact that we don't know how our story ends. He smiled. Very philosophical for someone who used to plot everything 3 chapters in advance. I'm learning to embrace spontaneity. We stopped at a small shrine where other former characters had left offerings, not to the traditional gods, but to something they called the author's grace. It made me uncomfortable seeing them worship me. They don't worship you, Duke Yoon said, reading my expression. They're grateful. You gave them existence, even if you didn't intend to give them consciousness, and then you gave them freedom. That's worth honoring. I just did what felt right. That's more than most creators do for their creations. We continued walking until we reached the hill overlooking the city. From here, you could see all of Hanyang spread out below, this world I'd built with words and imagination, now fully real and autonomous. Do you ever wonder if we're in another story? If someone in an even higher reality is writing us right now? All the time, Duke Yoon admitted, but then I decided it doesn't matter. Whether we're real or fictional, what matters is how we live, the choices we make, the connections we forge. That's very wise. I have a good teacher. Come on, Mi Young is making that new rice cake you wanted to try. As we walked back down the hill toward the city, toward our life together, I thought about my old existence, about sitting alone in my apartment, creating worlds I could never truly inhabit. I'd died to get here, lost everything I'd known, but I'd gained something infinitely more valuable, a real life, in a world that had started as fiction but had become more authentic than anything I'd known before. And if someone, somewhere, was writing this moment, if we were all just characters in yet another story, well, I hoped they'd learned the same lesson I had, that the best stories are the ones that set their characters free, even if it means the plot falls apart completely, even if it means the ending is uncertain, even if it means letting go of control and trusting that life, fictional or otherwise, will find its own way forward. What are you smiling about? Duke Yoon asked. Just thinking that I'm glad I wrote you, even if I didn't know what I was doing. I'm glad you wrote me too, but I'm even gladder you stopped writing and started living. We walked into the tea house together, into our real, messy, unscripted life. And somewhere, in a reality I could no longer access, my unfinished novel sat abandoned at chapter 47. The readers would never get the ending they expected. But I got an ending, a beginning really, that was better than anything I could have plotted. And that was the best plot twist of all.